following is a presentation of the Retro Network.
Greetings to all the top cows and lower tier barnyard animals who love their comic books. Thank you for tuning into this special bonus episode of Wizards, the podcast guide to comics. You have joined us during a mystical, magical time of year that some would call the season of the witch, or for the purposes of our discussion, the Witchblade. Yes, this time around we are discussing the 1998 Wizards special publication focusing on the smash sensation Witchblade from Top Cow Studios. Now, I may not be the host to the Witchblade or the Darkness, but I do my best to host a darn entertaining podcast. I'm Adam, and joining us this time around is a man who is very close to the history of Witchblade in that he was there at the beginning, writing, editing, and shepherding the adventures of Sarah Pazzini into the comic book stores, along with Michael Turner, Christina Z, and the rest. It's Dave Wohl. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Excellent. I'm glad to get a chance to talk to you again. You know, we had a discussion about your current exploits in the world of comics a little while back, but now we're going to travel back in time. I want to ask you this, first of all, you know, Wizard had released a Top Cow special in 97, and then here you were again in 1998 being interviewed for another special issue, getting your photo taken, providing details on upcoming projects. So obviously there was a deep connection there. How would you describe your personal relationship with Wizard Magazine in 1998?
It was interesting. You know, I could jump forward just for a second.
Yeah.
Like, I ended up working for Valiant before my current job, and that was because of my relationship with Wizard and Fred Pierce, who left Wizard. He was the publisher of Valiant, and our relationship stayed going, and he ended up hiring me because of our connection back then. So I was just jumping ahead for that. Yeah, you know, it was just interesting that, you know, Top Cow grew and Wizard grew like kind of at the same time. We definitely benefited from Wizard's growth. The fact that they, you know, gave so much publicity to our characters, and especially Witchblade, and me as a creator, Michael Turner as a creator, Mark as a creator. I would kind of say mutual benefit, because I guess it was, but I felt like we benefited a lot more than they did. I mean, I imagine since they did 2 magazines on, you know, based on our stuff, I guess, you know, we were helping them too. But it was great. I mean, we used to go to New York and visit them and Congers, you know, play games in their office and just like meet with everybody, and it was very, you know, connected. Like, you know, we'd tell them what we had coming out, and like we'd get a lot of good promotion for it, so it was fun. And all the guys there, you know, like Jim McLaughlin and Matt Senrich, and I mean, I ended up like staying close to a lot of them. Fred, like I said, you know, once after they all went on to different places, they were just a great group of people. Like, what a group of writers they had. Even the creative team and the designers, like, you know, like they were just all very good and cool.
This is jumping ahead a little bit too, but Jim McLaughlin became the editor at Top Cow at one point. Did he take your job right after you, or how did that work?
Yeah, he pretty much did. Well, I moved over into like this quasi creative role, and then he took over the day-to-day of the editor-in-chiefing because the relationship was so close.
Yeah, that is so
Cotton,
fun.
you know, ended up working, you know, doing a lot of stuff, and he and I ended up working at DC around the same time together. And I guess, is he still there?
I think he is, yeah. That's the thing. Like, we're going to get into all like the history of Witchblade and Top Cow and everything here. But the truth is, you had a life of fandom and a career in comics before your time at Top Cow in the 90s. So we want to kind of explore real quick how that all began.
Well, I grew up in New York. I went to this sort of like special high school in New York called Hunter College High School, where you had to, like, when you were in 6th grade, you took like if you did really well on your citywide tests, what we had there, a certain percentage of people would get invited to, it was like a free school, but it was like a private school, so you had to take a test to get in. And we had some, like, Cynthia Nixon, who was on Sex and the City, was there, and like a whole bunch of people, like a lot of creative, Kyle Baker in comics, several other people in comics got their start there. When we were seniors there, they had this thing called the ICY project, which was intercollegiate year. So, like, rather than take a whole like slate of classes, you're supposed to do something to experience the world. So they give you choices. And at that time, I kind of wanted to be an entertainment lawyer. I don't really know why. I really don't know why. But it's a long time ago. So they gave me like a list of choices. One of them was the Village Voice, was like the free newspaper in New York. There was another free newspaper in New York where I could be like an intern. And there was another one for Marvel, to be an intern at Marvel, because Marvel interns there would go to different departments, and there was something connected to the legal department. It was kind of big. But my friends, when I was a senior, I had a friend named Mark Siri who got me into comics when I was like a 10th grade. I wasn't really into comics. My dad would buy them when I was sick or whatever, but I was never really a fan. And when he and I became friends in this group we were in, like they were all just comic fans. So Mark would like give me his comics to read. It was like a Roger Stern and John Byrne Captain America and X-Men, you know, Chris Claremont and John Byrne. Some weird things like Megaton Man and E-Man and just like all these weird stories. So I kind of totally got into them. And then he and some of my other friends from high school were taking the internship at Marvel. So I just went along with them. The internship really had very little to do with legal anyway. Like we'd have like the indicia copy on the books to bring to the legal department, and they would just sign it, and that was pretty much the extent of it. We made copies and would get things for people, and like they had like this big like bin, like the assistant editors would just like throw stuff into the bin with a post-it note on it saying, make 5 copies of this and make 8 copies of this. It's 65%. So you learn how to use a Xerox machine, and you get a lot of free comics. Plus we were like in the central spot back when people were coming into the office a lot. So I get to meet a lot of people.
Yeah.
Like
What year was this? Who was the editor-in-chief? Who was kind of in charge of stuff over there?
Fall of 84. So Jim Shooter was the editor-in-chief. Secret Wars was just starting to come out. So a lot of, like Walt Simonson was working on Thor, and he would be in the office. And Chris Claremont was working on X-Men, and he'd be in the office. I think Walt was like the first person that I remember, the first creator that I really remember meeting. And we had a bullpen, of a lot of artists, and John Romita was there, and like a lot of letterers and production, like Rick Parker, and Chris Iliopoulos was like a starting up letterer when I was an intern there. So it was fun. It was a really cool experience. We used to go out with them and hang out. And
so how did you make the jump to then, because you became an editor, right?
So I started in the editorial department. Like basically, if you were good enough as an intern, like they'd ask you to kind of stay on as an editorial assistant, which is like a paid intern, like once the summer came around. So I kind of stayed on that. I worked with direct sales for a while with Peter David. Like they asked me to come work with them. So I was kind of sought after in my own little way. And then an editor, Don Daly, asked me to become his assistant editor. But I was going away to school. Like I already made a plan to go away to college in upstate New York during my sophomore year, because I was going to school in the city prior to that. And he's like, it's okay. Just work for me for a few months. So I went to him and was an assistant for like 3 months. And I worked on like Captain America and Transformers and G.I. Joe. And it was really fun. This Steve Ditko book called Chuck Norris and His Karate Commandos. And just some other like interesting projects. So I did that for a few months and then went away to school. But I totally missed working at Marvel. So I ended up coming back and ended up working for Mark Grunwald on Marvel Universe as like an editorial assistant on Marvel Universe. And I was there with him for like a while. And that's really where I learned a lot of stuff. Like I learned how to do all the production things and learned how to typeset a little bit, and like worked with him and Greg Wright. So I was there for a while, and then Howard Mackey asked me to be his assistant on the New Universe book. So we also worked on Avengers and West Coast Avengers and stuff. And then I left again and I moved to California to see what it was like. I worked for a newspaper. Mark Siri and I, my friend from high school, moved to California together. But then I was there for like a year and decided I missed New York. So I came back and then worked at Marvel for the 3rd time, and then worked for Carl Potts or Bob Budiansky. I worked on trading cards. I got to know Jim Lee and Mark Silvestri a lot because I worked on the X-Men cards and the Marvel Universe cards. I worked on special projects. Is really weird, like Captain America versus the Asthma Monster. And then Carl asked me to be an assistant for him in Epic. So I ended up working on Hellraiser and again G.I. Joe and just some other really weird, like it's a whole group of projects. That was my last job at Marvel before Mark Silvestri asked me to go work for Top Cow.
Yeah, and let me ask about that time, because that early 90s period, right, like at Marvel was setting the stage for the huge boom that was about to happen. And I'm curious, just from an insider perspective, what you saw building up from 84 to, let's say, 1990, right? Do you have any idea how the group that became the Image founders managed to sell millions of copies of comic books at that point? Because it was just, there was the collector's mentality maybe coming over from baseball cards. It was bleeding into the comic sphere. Was it just because you would work there, the Marvel marketing machine with direct sales? Like, was that just building over time? Like, what would you say allowed for that explosion to happen?
Yeah, I guess it really was a combination of things. It was the direct market like growing and the collectors kind of coming to the direct market and buying books. Like the whole phenomenon of alternate covers and exclusive covers and all sorts of different things. I mean, like by the time I was working on G.I. Joe, I remember it was such a regular thing to have like polybag trading cards, like in like 92. Yeah, with Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man. Yeah, it's sort of like the late 80s for some reason. Like the collectors came to the business. 'Cause I remember books like that, like people would buy like hundreds of copies like themselves. Like that's when the speculator market like really kind of took off. I mean, it was definitely a combination of really, really good books. These artists that definitely grabbed hold of like people's imaginations, like Jim Lee and Will, but yeah, all the Image guys basically. And then every time they launched a new book, the sales would just go up, you know, like because around that time, like in 1991, 92 was like, you know, the X-Men splitting up into Uncanny and then the new Jim Lee X-Men. Like right when he was doing our X-Men trading cards, he was doing that at the same time. I don't know how he was able to do so much. He was crazy busy.
Yeah, just the X-Force and everything just like exploding in a big way.
And then having like, you know, like all those several Spider-Man books. Yeah, X-Force with Rob Liefeld. And I remember like even in the office, it was kind of the same debates that were out there in the world, you know, like people would ask, why is Rob so popular, you know, and it was like really cool, you know, it's like people were just like acknowledging these different art styles or Jim Valentino and being like, you know, really cool with them. And it kind of expanded what was popular, you know, and who was popular. But I remember Suzanne Gaffney, who was like the assistant editor of like X-Force, you know, was saying, look, you know, you could say what you want, but you know, like he's selling like 1 million copies. So I don't know what your times change, you know, and then he's definitely like latched on to like a generation of people, you know, and there's no reason to question it that he's not, you know, doing this classic style, but he's grabbed people's attention, and that's what's important. And I feel like there's a lot of even people on the inside like weren't quite understanding like where it was going and what it was about. And I think that's what led to Marvel having this sort of moment where they were like, you know, no, it's not, it's the characters, it's not the creators. We can't let them push so much. And then that's what made them want to leave and do their own thing.
And that's what I want to hear about now, because you say you're getting to know Mark Silvestri as you're working through the trading cards. He's doing a lot of work there and things like that. How did Mark Silvestri approach you to say, hey, by the way, we're leaving, we're setting up our own thing over here?
Well, it was like a year later. I wasn't like part of the inside, like, you know.
Okay.
No, he had started, I think they started in 92 and they hired me like, I think Cyberforce maybe 3 had come out when I came and started working with them. Like I was working on the 4th issue, and they weren't coming out too regularly around then. So it was probably like a year. I'd actually talked to Jim Lee about going to work with them earlier. I think they left in the summer, and I think like in January I talked to Jim Lee, and then a few months later I ended up talking to Mark and taking his job.
Okay. Now, were you ready? Like, were you just buying into the excitement of a new thing, or what was your decision? Okay, well, I'll leave Marvel. I'll go do this.
I would say 40% of it was that I wanted to move back to California. Some of it was some personal reasons that I really wanted to get out of where I was, but nothing to do with work. I mean, I loved working at Marvel. It was so much fun. And I loved the people there. And, you know, like I said, I used to go out with them. You know, it was kind of my life. Well, I was going to school full time too. Like I really wanted to graduate college and ended up not graduating. I left like I was 9 credits short of graduating when I left. But yeah, there was definitely like an appeal to be part of something, you know, from the ground up. I mean, at that point, Top Cow was like 4 people. There was Mark's fiance, and he had a sort of an assistant named Robin. And then everyone else he worked with were people who were connected to Jim Lee, like Scott Williams was his inker and Joe Chata was his colorist, and they were at the same office. So it was basically just to be part of something that was growing.
Let's jump ahead a little bit, because I know, you know, you're doing some Cyberforce, you're doing the Ballistic miniseries, you're doing a lot of different things at Top Cow, but then you get to this point we're leading into a new phase, kind of moving out of superhero action, and maybe there's a little something mystical around the corner, which is this Witchblade concept. And in this special, there is an interview, it's called Blade of Glory, where it's stated that, you know, initially you and Brian Haberlin were working just on a concept involving a sentient weapon. And
Yeah.
Can you take us from that point, like, hey, we're talking about this, to where you're bringing on the other members of the Top Cow team and how the idea evolved into its form for issue number 1?
So we started out because we were both fans of like Michael Moorcock, Elric, you know, a sentient weapon that had a mind of its own. And I think it was more like we just wanted some more variety. It's weird, like in retrospect, it seemed like we were just trying to cash in on the bad girl craze, but in reality, I guess I felt more comfortable writing women. I kind of wanted to. So I think think we both were really into doing like a grounded story. I think up until that point, like all the characters that we had put out were very like, superhero based, and Weapon Zero was like really heavy sci-fi. And at that time, I think X-Files was just sort of taking off. I guess I always wanted to do like a cop drama or something. So I think probably like we had a lot of basic ideas for what we wanted to do and then just figured out a way to merge them. I always like stories where it's just like it's like something you try to do. I mean, in retrospect, it doesn't seem that realistic, but basically a realistic storyline with some kind of fantasy element thrown into it, From Witchblade on, like a lot of our stories were like that. I mean, Darkness was basically the same thing if you narrow it down. And I grew up in New York, so I felt comfortable doing something in New York, even though Marvel does all their stuff there. So yeah, so we just kind of built it out from there. Like I knew I wanted it to be in New York. I knew it wanted to be a woman. We knew we wanted this Witchblade as being the things. And it seemed like making her a police officer was a way to just like get her into situations that the Witchblade could do something in. I was really into like New York landmarks and stuff. I really would like sit and do research and think about I realized that that's probably not that important, Well, to me it was at the time, but it wasn't really after the fact. Mike never really liked to draw them, I don't think. So, I mean, we did the Statue of Liberty.
And I'm curious, as you're conceiving just the idea of the Witchblade itself, was there a particular element of it that excited you most? Was it that it had like, ultimately, as you revealed, a history of other bearers of the Witchblade? Was it that it had like the ever-changing kind of look to it when it would manifest?
Yeah, to me, the history of other bearers, I think, was really important. Because I remember really early on thinking of someone like Joan of Arc, like thinking of all these people that, that had some kind of mystical story about them that we could kind of latch onto and it could seem kind of historical. And yeah, that was really important to me. So, I mean, it was really early on in the process that we went to Mark and talked to him about it. And Brad Foxhoven was there for a lot of it to kind of help flesh out the character. Like once we knew what we wanted with the Witchblade and Sarah Pizzini, I'm not think I didn't have her name yet, but probably she was just Sarah. Then we came to Mark. And then once it was decided that Mike would be the artist on it, I mean, he was probably already on to Ballistic. And because we took him off Ballistic, I think or maybe it was a Stryker story. I don't know, whatever it was really quick. And Mark like suggested Mike for it. So then once he was going to be the artist on it, we kind of all started working on it together. And Joe Benitez, I think, was really heavily involved in the design of the character, of the way the Witchblade works and the Witchblade stuff. Because it was definitely his strong point, was the kind of metallic alien technology thing. Like he was really good at that.
Yeah. Now another player in this game eventually here is Christina Z, and she got a lot of play in Wizard. She was kind of an anomaly in comic books at the time, for being like
Jim McLaughlin was definitely fascinated with Christina Z.
Yeah.
He sort of pit us against each other a little bit.
Oh,
I mean,
really?
because he'd be like, "I'm sorry, you can't be in the top 10 because she's in the top 10," as a writer, and like it was always very like nebulous, like who the voters were of
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah.
Like she came along a little bit later. Like once the basic idea was set, I think I remember starting to talk to her when like issue 1 was probably being drawn, and I've been writing Ripclaw. Like we were doing Ripclaw and Witchblade at the same time, and I wasn't so happy with what I was writing. It was just a little too boring. Like I don't know why I started showing her things, but we just started talking. We met like in probably the Wizard chat, maybe. I don't know. I used to host this Wizard chat on AOL like every week. And like a lot of people that I'm still friendly with, I met like while I was hosting that Wizard chat.
So she wasn't even working in the office yet? You brought her in?
No, she definitely wasn't. No, I met her on AOL. Like,
oh, wow. Okay.
And then just started talking. And then I showed her, I don't know, I probably showed her the Ripclaw that I was writing, and then showed her the Witchblade I was writing. And she like was an editor. Like I basically asked her to edit me, to help make me better. Like she was like tearing my stuff apart and telling me like, this is generic and this is, like not holding any punches. And I wasn't really used to that. Like mostly the people that I work with as an editor were just like, I mean, the most extreme, mistakes I made, they would catch. But beyond that, it was just like, let me do what I want, which I thought I wanted. But then I knew to grow, I needed someone to kind of push me. So she was there to push me. And then I saw that she had a lot of really good ideas herself. So we ended up sort of bouncing back and forth. So like after the first issue, she got more involved in the story creation, and Mike got more involved in the story creation. And then actually her and I would kind of write different parts of the story and then go over each other's stuff. and then Mike would go over it and make his suggestions. So.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I mean, because obviously, like, women writing comics wasn't like a new thing. You had Joe Duffy and Ann Nesenti and Louise Simonson, people I'm sure you interacted with a lot in your early days. Colleen Durand's doing her own thing in the independent sphere. So like that was the thing, but it just felt like Wizard was just like, can you believe a girl writes comics? And then, but then here you guys are, working together. Speaking of which, there is an article that's basically a transcript in this issue called "Plotting a Main Course," which is you, Christina Z, Michael.
Oh yeah, I saw that at the dinner. I noticed how cheap the dinner was. It was like $40 for the three of us.
Well, and I want to ask about that because, you guys are sitting around plotting issues 22 to 24 of Witchblade, but you're at this restaurant and there's a table that you're waiting for. And Christina basically sets you out to irritate some other patrons so that you can get there. You go over and fake a coughing fit nearby because it was an outdoor seating thing. And then they got up and left. And
so it's legitimate. I'm not sure if that really happened. I mean, it might have. I don't really remember that well, but I don't think I would cough. I think that's a little gross. I might just clear my throat a lot. I could have done something like that. I don't know. It might have just been Jim McLaughlin like saying that.
We've learned this with Jim's writing because he would do these odd locations. Like he did an interview with Adam Kubert at White Castle at one point, and he created this whole thing about we had an eating competition, and Jimmy Palmiotti was there, and Andy Kubert was there, and then somebody online said, "Oh yeah, well I talked to Adam when I went to the Kubert school, and he said that never happened." So Wizard maybe was adding some flourishes to.
Yeah, it might have been made up. I really can't remember. It's possible, but it was fun. But just going over what you were saying, so by the time we were at like the 20 something, she was way more involved in the writing, and I was more of an editor and she was more of a writer at that point.
Yeah, during this period as well, leading up to these issues, obviously Tales of the Witchblade had come out. Was that always just meant to be like a bunch of different writers, or was that something she was shepherding? Like, because it was kind of pushed in Wizard, like, oh, this is Christina Z's getting her own Witchblade title type thing at one point. So.
Yeah, like I probably when it first started, because I know she pitched the Anne Bonny was someone that she always loved. So probably at that point, maybe it was considered. But I think making it more open to more like writers. I mean, I totally forgot about that Warren Ellis intro. That was like pretty cool.
That's pretty funny. Yeah.
But I remember, him working on his Tales of the Witchblade story. That was really cool. And Garth Ennis did like kind of a quasi Tales of the Witchblade story because it was like a darkness, the medieval Spawn Witchblade story, which is sort of a Tales of the Witchblade story, but cooler.
I know people are like dedicated to mainline, Sarah Witchblade, that all the decades that's been running. But Tales of the Witchblade appeals to me so much. Like I love just like the one-off stories, and you get so many cool characters that come out of that, and you're just like, wow.
The one that Warren did was really cool. I kind of wanted to do more with that. I think that was Jim McLaughlin who definitely was heavily involved in that one, but I thought it came out really cool.
Yeah. Now, as this is all building, we're talking about issue 1 comes out and it gets a lot of buzz. What was your first indication from outside sources that Witchblade was going to be a success?
Interesting question. So we had no idea. I think at that time it was kind of weird because we were having issues with Image, and then there was, I think when Witchblade 1 maybe or 2 came out, one of them, we had left Image for a little while and we're trying to be on our own. And we had done a Cyblade She with Bill Tucci that introduced Witchblade, I think, for the first time.
Yeah.
And that was when we were outside of Image. We did that on our own, and we saw how that sold, and that sold really well. And it was a great collaboration. So we were hoping it would do well, and Michael, seemed to be getting like a group of people who enjoyed looking at his artwork. So it was definitely exciting. Like I think Wizard probably helped tell us, that this is going to be pretty big. And then we saw the initial numbers starting to come in, and we realized that it was going to be a hit. We didn't know. You never know. At that time, things were still selling really well too. I mean, not as well as they were a couple of years earlier, but still really good. And we put Mark's name on it, to make sure everyone knew like it was one of our like top cow books, but it was still sort of a surprise.
Oh, okay. Obviously Michael Turner's contribution got a lot of eyes on it. Not that he was a name yet, but suddenly everybody said, what is this art? Like we haven't seen this before. So there's a how to draw Witchblade tutorial in this issue that they put in there. So he'll break it down for you. But can you recall, obviously you had been working with him, but when you first saw the Witchblade art come through that he was producing, like was there a specific reaction in the office? Did you guys have a buzz? Or again, like you said, it was just like like, well, we'll put it out and see what happens?
Oh, no. We totally had a buzz. Like all the artists would kind of like watch what he was doing. And he grew so fast from the Striker book that he started to Ballistic. That's why we jumped him onto Witchblade so fast. He seemed like he was ready so quickly to launch a new book. No, it was striking to see. I mean, I guess because you could look in that book, in the Wizard book, we were talking about plotting Witchblade 20 or whatever. And at the same time, so he was jumping from 25 to Fathom #1. So that was over like a 2-year span, basically. He just exploded. But yeah, we definitely had a sense that there was something special about him. I mean, I remember from seeing a sample, from seeing the way he could draw trees and cars and people, like beautiful women and muscular men.
Yeah.
He just seemed to have a talent. Like he just needed to build on his storytelling, because that's takes the longest to come out. But there was definitely something special about him.
Yeah, speaking of that, let's jump on that real quick, because this issue did come with a Fathom 0 issue packed in, and there was a special edition that Wizard released, and he's with the book for several years and then decides to kind of go into his creator-owned thing. Now, you mentioned earlier that period that Top Cow separates from Image. A lot of that was wrapped up in Rob Liefeld, from what was reported. Mark Silvestri was very clear about that in the pages of Wizard, and saying that there was the explanation, I think, in the Image documentary at some point, that Rob Liefeld was trying to get Michael Turner over to his studio and all that. But eventually, during this point too, it was kind of floated, like when Cliffhanger started with J. Scott Campbell and Joe Madureira, that Jim Lee might be trying to get him over there. So do you recall, with Fathom coming out, was that a way of keeping this new sensation in comics creatively satisfied, keeping him at home? Was that kind of the idea behind it? Okay, you can leave Witchblade, you can do your thing. How did that come together?
Yeah, I think there were so many opportunities for him at that point. And yeah, it was to basically allow him to have his own imprint, within Top Cow that could satisfy both, where he basically had a creator-owned deal within Top Cow that could match whatever deal he could have in other places. So, he could keep doing what he wants, and he could keep doing it with us, which we were basically his family, that he grew up in comics with. So all things being equal, and I think all things were being equal. So he could have moved on, I think, probably, and gotten a better deal somewhere else even then, whatever the percentages were of what he got at Top Cow. But I think the family part of it was important to him. So I think he ended up staying there, because even when ultimately, I don't know, I guess it was 5 years later or 6 years later.
Yeah, he does Aspen. Yeah.
Started Aspen. It was really, the whole internal nucleus of Aspen is all Top Cow people, and still are. So I think that was very important to him, the whole family aspect of it.
Yeah, now during this period that Witchblade is growing, it's just getting more popular. Like you say, Wizard is really pushing it, and just naturally in their top 10, they're polling, all the stores around the country, saying, what's your top book? And Witchblade is top 10 characters, top 10 sales for books and things like that. Wizard claims in issue 82 in 1998 that Top Cow was the biggest company in sales, right behind Marvel and DC. That seems hard to believe, but maybe you can confirm that. And I want to know, as sales increased on Witchblade and eventually through the Darkness, what was the biggest change, if any, at Top Cow? Did you notice a change? Were the sales really making a difference?
I can't imagine that Top Cow on its own could have been that, because we never did that many books. So probably the way you look at it, if you're talking about
Wizards tweaking it for a headline type thing,
or something. I don't know. Well, I mean, another thing that we, for the maybe 2-year or 3-year span, where we were a really well-run machine, where we had people that were specifically there, like Renee Geerlings and Mary Buxton, were both just trying to make sure that everyone was on time. On time was really important to us, because we were notoriously late at the beginning. And then around that time, we kind of just totally shifted into this getting our books out on time every month. We had this guarantee, I think we did. I'm not sure what the guarantee was.
I remember those ads. Yeah.
For a couple of years, I think that totally helped our sales. When people knew that our stuff was coming out regularly, everything kind of grew. And it was impressive, because we had this run, like in that Wizard magazine, we had Ascension and, Spirit of the Tao, and all our guys kind of going and doing their thing. The Weapon Zero continued with Benitez, and they all had a good life of their own. Brandon Peterson, was working on his books. He did the Arcana, his medieval spawn Witchblade book, and It was a really cool time, like we were able to launch these new titles with great creators, and they would do well.
One of the other things that was reported on in the Top Cow special that predated this one was that this Legend of the Tao was going to be released simultaneously worldwide, multiple languages, the first ever comic book to be launched everywhere all at once. And I was just wondering if you remember that at all. Was that just marketing hype? Did you guys really attempt to do that? Was it a hit in any other country?
Yeah, I'm not even sure. I don't remember that. I mean, it could have been, because at that point we had a really good licensing deal. Like, I remember seeing Witchblade in Turkey when I was there, so it might have very well, been released. But I'm not sure, like, what that.
That wasn't anything you were betting on. Like, oh, this is going to be the big one. Okay.
No. I wasn't really too involved in the foreign licensing.
One of the big changes, it's said in here that this was the plan from the beginning, is that you wanted Top Cow to be multimedia. You weren't just focusing on comics. You wanted to take it into the entertainment industry at large. So Witchblade actually makes it to TV on the TNT network, produced by Oliver Stone's production company. Obviously, Jim, Todd, and Eric, they'd all dip their toes into animation, to varying degrees of success.
We tried with Cyberforce, and it went kind of far with Fox Television, but then it fell through.
Yeah, you tried with Cyberforce, that didn't happen. Witchblade finally happens. What do you remember about the development of the Witchblade TV series from page to screen? What were you involved with most? What stood out to you?
Well, I remember having a lot of meetings first with Oliver Stone, who wasn't really much he would show up at the meetings, but he didn't seem like he really was involved so much. It was mostly his executive producer, Dan Halstead, who really was hands-on. And then it was a long process to actually get a network behind it. The head of TNT at that time was a guy named Spike Selden, who ended up joining Top Cow like maybe a couple of years later. And he was a huge fan of Witchblade and Top Cow in general. So he actually was the guy who brought it to TNT. And then I just remember having meetings there, and just the head of TNT suggesting she should have a dog, and it was like a whole bunch of maybe we should go this way, maybe we should go this way. They were really good about running stuff by us and taking our suggestions, but it was a huge collaboration.
Now, during this period, obviously Wizard's big thing was casting calls. They loved like kind of priming, like, oh, it could be this person. So there were a lot of actresses that are being teased, at least in Wizard. They're saying like Natasha Henstridge or Yasmin covered Electra. Was there any other actress that you recall getting close to the role before Yancey Butler?
Vanessa Marcil, she was big at that time. She ended up doing something else. I know they went kind of with her. They kind of got into Yancey pretty quickly, though, because she was a good actress, and she had done this movie with Wesley Snipes, Drop Zone, at that time, and this Man and Machine show on TV that people liked. And so I think they gravitated toward her pretty fast, and we liked her, so it seemed like a good deal.
Now, I'm curious to just get your opinion on how it turned out, because although it was a pretty cool show, the main complaint heard from most fans, right, is that she never had the full Witchblade look from the comics, for any like the time. She had the gauntlet, and that was about it. So do you think that design would ever fly, even with today's special effects, or would it always have to be more grounded like the 90s version?
I don't know. It probably depended on what network it was on. I could see if it was on Sci-Fi or something, maybe. And actually, even because, like I said, Spike, who is the fan of it, he ended up leaving TNT before the show even got made.
Oh,
so I think if he was in charge, maybe it would have been a little closer to it. It's hard to say, because I could see them thinking they'd be offending too many people with it. So, maybe they wouldn't do it. They would try to do it tastefully or something. So yeah, probably the way it came out is the way it would come out in most places.
The one thing I just also want to bring up in the multimedia sphere is that on the back of this issue, they're promoting Songs of the Witchblade, a soundtrack to the comic book. And this is actually not even the only one they did. Later on, there was another Witchblade soundtrack that got released.
I think later on was the one connected to the TV show.
Yeah. So there was just a lot of cool stuff there. But did you ever get to put in like, hey, what if we brought in this person? Or did you have any involvement at all in putting that together?
I kind of remember Christina was a little more involved in that.
Because it says conceived by all three of you.
Like Brad Foxhoven, I guess somehow he met this Tim Carr guy at Geffen Records. And I remember having a meeting or two at the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel. And I remember meeting a couple of times Kat Bielen from Babes in Toyland. And she would talk about like, how she envisioned it. I think we threw out, there were definitely names that we threw out. I think everyone was excited about the Peter Steele from Typo Negative, like being involved in it. And I know Christina's like a huge music aficionado, so I'm sure she had a lot of suggestions for it. I think her and Mike actually would like talk to Kat and had like, meetings where they would just go over like, the ideas for the songs and stuff. So we definitely were involved in it. I think at that point, it was maybe they thought that doing this music thing would help get a movie made because it was before the TV show was going, but it didn't.
It's a real fun package. It was very, of the time, but it's a very cool look. Now, the other thing that's in this issue that's just really fun, Wizard always, they'll do the interviews, they'll do the histories, they'll do whatever, but then they always like to throw original art into their books, especially at this time. So they have a piece that was called Girl Power, and they say, ever wonder what your favorite superheroines would look like if they had Witchblade?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll go down the list, but I want to hear which one is your favorite, or if you think there's another character that would be interesting with the Witchblade. But they have Leonard Kirk drawn Supergirl. She's got these full-on wings and everything. They have Louis Small Jr. doing Vampirella. They have, of course, Stephen Hughes doing Lady Death. Kachoo by Terry Moore from Strangers in Paradise. That was
my favorite.
Okay.
That was my favorite.
That one's hilarious. That one's great. They have Howard Porter doing Wonder Woman. They have Billy Tucci, former collaborator there with She. And then finally Jim Ballot doing Catwoman. These are just like all interesting ideas to mix. I personally think it makes the most sense for Lady Death, but at the same time, it feels like her costume kind of already looks like that a little bit,
Yeah.
So yeah, and they go even more topical of the moment because they have Ryan Dunleavy, who we've interviewed for the podcast, who's a cartoonist and a lot for them. But they have like, what if Hillary Clinton had the Witchblade? What if Fiona Apple had the Witchblade? Queen Elizabeth?
What if Janet Reno had the Witchblade and her hand is chopped off?
So I mean, there's a lot of gags in there it was just funny to see that stuff. But I'm curious then, as you look back on your time, with Witchblade, with Top Cow, but what is your most vivid memory? Like when you think, Witchblade was this, or Witchblade, we had to promote it here or talk about it here. Like what do you recall was the biggest moment?
Well, before you asked me, like, when did I know that we had something? And I remember right after Witchblade, sometime in between issue 1 and 2, Mike Turner and Mike had never like done a convention. Probably, I mean, we met him at San Diego Con, but he never like went anywhere on his own yet, like no signings or anything. So he and I got invited to this convention in Tampa. That wasn't really a convention. It was more like a retailer show. But actually the guy, James Brightbeal, who he was part of CrossGen Comics eventually, but this is before CrossGen. So we got invited to the show in Tampa to do a signing for Witchblade #1. And he and I were like sharing this hotel room together. And we weren't really getting along. It was a weird time because like, this is like my ego. I shouldn't be talking about this, but it's my ego. But he was like totally like surpassing me in popularity. And it was kind of bumming me out. I was kind of pissed off like when issue 1 came out because there were parts of it, like I said at the beginning when you were asking me, I wanted New York to be like important in the story. And I remember having him like showing him reference of like a police station, on whatever 19th Street or something in New York. And he drew it like as if it was in California and there were like palm trees and stuff. And I got all pissed off. And I'm thinking in my head, like, oh, this kind of stuff, like people are going to get upset about it. It's going to bother people that it doesn't look right. So we go out to this show in Tampa and we're sharing a hotel room. And actually, while we were sharing the hotel room, someone from another company tried to call him to hire him. And I was like sitting there and I'm like, what? How did they get your phone number at a hotel in Tampa? And then we end up going to this thing and huge lines like of fans, of retailers, like everyone is waiting in line for him. A couple of people for me, but 98% for him. And it's like out the door. Like we're the only creators at the show, and everyone was out just like it was like hours and hours and hours of signing issue 1. And that's what made me realize a couple of things. I was like, wow, this guy's really popular because everyone really was there to see him and get sketches from him and talk to him. A couple of people for me, it was cool. And like at that point, it didn't bother me anymore. I wasn't like, maybe it bothered me a little, but I mean, I've gotten more humble since then, so that kind of stuff doesn't bother me anymore. Plus, I realized then, the art is so much more important, especially to the people who are fans of our stuff. So that's one thing. The second thing is like the book was popular, he was popular, and no one cared about the issues that I had with the story. Like at that point, we were still getting like physical mail and like probably like people posting on forums. Not one person mentioned any of the issues that I had. So that humbled me too. Like that made me realize that this guy is the one who knows like what people care about. And I know what I care about. And I know like Christina and I could sort of do a story that it'll resonate with them, but they're there for him, like we're dressing. And kind of once I had that realization, it was cool watching him. Like once I was able to get past like this weird ego thing of this guy who I brought into the company surpassing me and becoming this like huge thing. I don't know. I guess it's a weird thing to experience. It was amazing to watch him grow, and watch his humility like stay through everything that was happening to him. Like there were business decisions that he needed to make, like when he ended up going to Aspen and stuff, but he was always humble and he was always good to everyone around him. But it was cool being able to have this like ringside seat to watch his ascension. And to me, that Tampa place is where it started in this thing, just like seeing him for what he really was and actually being on the inside of his world. Because since we were sharing a hotel room, like I said, I got to hear someone trying to lure him over to another company, like while I was sitting there. And he was like an open book. There was not much subterfuge with him, like if people were trying to hire him, he'd be like, hey, Mark, people are trying to hire me. And not like he could have kicked me out of the room. He could have been like, I can't talk now. Let's not talk. But he didn't. He was like, he didn't mind me hearing it because he knew I was looking for his best interest too. So it was cool. He and I shared hotel rooms like for years at conventions and stuff. And we got along really well.
That's awesome. Now, I do have to ask just very quickly, because this is a question that comes up a lot when we post about Witchblade stuff. Our followers, and our listeners are just like, whatever happened to Christina Z? Where is she? What did she do? Like, are you still in touch with her? Is she still in any type of publishing? Like, what is her direction now?
Before she was with me, she had been writing like music reviews and stuff. I think she still does that once in a while.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure what she does. I think she's like an inspector or something. I saw her maybe last year too at a convention. She still is around.
Okay.
I don't think she liked comics, but I don't think she really felt like the huge need to be doing it. She's doing all right though. We talked.
Okay. That's good to hear. Yeah, I know the fans are just interested. They're like, wait, I'm just curious. So ultimately then, just as we get to kind of the end of this story, like what led to your departure from Top Cow? And then what do you think about the legacy of Witchblade since that time, since you moved on?
In the early 2000s, Brad, who I talked about a few times, we ended up developing a relationship with John Woo. Like he was going to produce something for us, and that ended up not happening. But Brad ended up going to work for John Woo for this game company that he was starting, and he asked me if I wanted to join him. And at that point at Top Cow, I kind of felt like I'd done my part. I was looking for something new. Prior to working at Top Cow, I'd never worked at a place for more than 3 years in a row, and I was already at Top Cow for 11, 1993 to 2004. So I kind of thought maybe it was time, and it just seemed like an interesting opportunity that I couldn't pass up. So I left Top Cow to go work with John Woo, and I love the way they've kept going. I think a lot of the stuff that they ended up doing with the Witchblade was stuff that I was hoping to do, like connecting the Witchblade and the darkness into some bigger. I think we put it in the good hands of Matt Hawkins, who when we hired him, he had been doing the Arthurian book. He was really into lore, like a lot of the stuff that he's created and written since he came to Top Cow. He's done Postal and like all these different projects where he does a lot of research. Like he was really into like the whole Arthurian mythology, and it seemed like he would get into the Witchblade mythology and trying to connect the different mythologies of the characters, and that's what he's done. And I think he did well with it. I think he spearheaded the manga Witchblade stuff that came out, and that's the other Witchblade TV show that came out. There was the anime, and I thought that was really cool. So yeah, I like what they've been doing with it. I think it's cool.
That's great. So what are you doing these days, though, if people want to check in and find out what's Dave Wohl up to?
Well, I'm the editor-in-chief at Zenescope. I've been there for a couple of years. I've been doing a lot of writing for them recently. I write the Oz series that we have coming out. We're in the midst of one, Oz, Kingdom of the Lost. The second issue, I think, just came out, and the third issue is coming out soon. And I'm also like editing a lot of other books there. We have this cool Van Helsing Kickstarter that we're starting to do. Actually, I think I announced it here for the first time. Probably shouldn't even talk about it yet. Oh, well. That's going to be coming in December. And I think Zenescope does a lot of cool stuff. We're a small little world where, Dave Franchini and I and our bosses, Joe and Ralph, kind of create the outlines for the stories, and we bring in writers to work with. It's a fun job.
That's fantastic. Yeah. And if you guys are curious about that world of Zenescope, we have a 3-part interview series that we've done with these guys. And we still have to get Ralph's interview out. It was so long. It's taken forever for me to edit. So that third part is coming, but all in good time. But thank you so much. This was really fun, David. Like, I really enjoyed all your stories, and just like the little offhanded comments. I'm like, we could do a whole episode just on that or this or that, because you've worked with everybody. You've been all over the place. So that's fantastic. But again, thank you so much.
Come back soon.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd love to have you.
This has been a presentation of the Retro Network.